Well, welcome to the to feel resilient and feel resilient about your health, your liberty, your spirituality, and your sustainability. And welcome to my co-host Malva. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this whole idea of the coming food crisis, and then how to feel resilient to it. And I was just thinking about a story that relates to it. The other day, I was in one of the big box store pharmacies, and if you can tell, my voice is off a little bit. And so I was going in and looking for just some cough drops, and they had a few packages. And I thought, okay, that's good. I got what I want. But then I'm looking down the aisle from that point in the aisle, and the whole aisle was like halfway in this big box store, it was totally empty. Now, I didn't bother to go through and see what all the things that they didn't have, but I think that was the first time that I've personally walked into a store and now see empty shelves. For you, what are you noticing in Poland? Any similar type things as you've been out and about?
Fortunately for the people here, no, the shelves are overflowing and they're full. But I have noticed that people's carts are emptier and emptier because the prices have gone up
Hmm.
extremely.
Okay. So they're buying less. Like there's food available, but they're buying less.
Yeah,
Interesting.
because the prices of things, we talked about cucumber meter a while ago. The prices of things
Yeah.
are just double the cucumber meter as opposed to what they were before. So
Yeah.
people are more conscious with the expenditures that they have in the stores. The only times that I ever saw empty shelves here was between New Year's and between Christmas and New Year's when they were doing inventory. But
Yeah.
essentially, it's rather the prices that are going high
Ah,
than the lack of or food shortage. However, family both in Canada and the US are saying that, I'm sorry, I can't find medication or formula or things for my babies. And I'm actually here getting things from Europe and sending it to them, which is
hmm.
something that was always the other way around.
Yes. Right. Oh, interesting. Well, let's talk today about some of the causes. I want to do a little bit of an outline today, an introduction to the causes of this, the coming and imminent food crisis. Excuse me. And there's a number of different things that are leading to this, but I want to focus on three of them today. And one of those things is the fact that countries generally, I've been doing some research on, so there's about 30 countries in the world right now who have been historically big exporters of food, are now restricting their food exports, and particularly things with grains and sugar and with meat. And so when countries start to feel the pressure that they don't have enough to feed their own people, then they start to restrict their food exports. The second thing is the literal war on farmers, and we're seeing this in we saw the catastrophe in Sri Lanka. We could talk more about that. There's huge pressures going on right now, and riots and protests and et cetera in Holland, the Netherlands, and Ireland, and in Canada. Some of the people who, through government agencies, are actually looking to restrict nitrogen fertilizer to the farmers and forcing them to say, okay, well, uh, nitrogen is a greenhouse, like a very powerful greenhouse gas. So what we need to do is we need to restrict these nitrogen fertilizers, which also take huge amounts of natural gas to produce. Then what's going on is these governments are actually suppressing and putting policies to reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer. And that's what happened in Sri Lanka, whereas the government made a quick turn and said, no more synthetic fertilizers, everybody go organic. And of course, then the whole system just collapsed. And then you have riots and the president being ousted, et cetera. And so there's these similar type agendas going on again in the Netherlands, in Ireland, in Canada, governments that are really pushing forward on the green agenda. Now, when we talk to my friend Martin, who is a permaculturalist, he'll agree that there's a need for us to move to more organic farming, et cetera. But if you talk to him, he'll talk about the fact that if he's going to take a piece of property and turn that into a food, what he calls a food forest through organic fertilizer, it's going to take somewhere close to 7 years. It doesn't happen overnight. That's the whole point. And, we've looked at, with Martin and I, our discussion on The Biggest Little Farm. And that when people watch that video, they see this transformation from just a 200 acres of just a dust bowl to the Garden of Eden. It takes seven plus years. Excuse me. So, a government that says, okay, we need to push this change overnight is going to produce literally a collapse in the food production in the country. And again, the living example of that is what happened in Sri Lanka. And of course, this is all under the influence and the pressure coming from the United Nations and the World Economic Forum to reduce nitrogen emissions. And again, this movement away from synthetic fertilizer to organic fertilizers. It's getting so desperate in the Netherlands that some people are suggesting they'll lose up to 30% of their farms. And of course, the people in Holland are not. It'll be interesting to see what ultimately happens because they're rising up against that idea. So that was the second one. So the first one, again, is countries are restricting their food exports. And we're talking about the cause of the coming food crisis and how to feel resilient to that. So countries are restricting their food exports, the war on farmers, and then the kinetic war. So then right now, the war that we're seeing between Russia and the Ukraine and the disruption of particularly grain supply chains when the ports are shut down. And of course, Russia and Ukraine, big exporters of grain. So I find it interesting that being close to that conflict that's going on right now, that you're not seeing the impact of that right as much as I would have expected.
I believe that it's because a lot of the people are more do-it-yourself here than they are in the United States and Canada. So Canada and the United States have very, or the people of Canada and the United States have very much been accustomed to having a easy way out, if I can say that. So if I'm hungry, I'm going to go and grab something that's already done for me. If I want something, then I'm just going to go out and buy it. And it was other people servicing us more so now in Canada and the United States, whereas in Europe, let's say Italy and France, there has always been this push and pull of try to bake your own bread, try to grow your own tomatoes, try to sew your own Christmas ornaments, try to make your own gingerbread house. So a lot of things are made from scratch here. And as cliche as this sounds, Europe is much closer, from my experience, to Mother Earth and the ground and doing things ourselves than Canada and United States that I know, and I've lived in both places around the world. And even in Australia, they're more let's do it ourselves. The people that I have experienced and been part of their lives so graciously. So when I think I'll make a cake for my child's birthday, I'm thinking flour, butter and eggs. Whereas a lot of my friends, when they're thinking, I'm going to bake a cake for my child, they're thinking bought frosting, cake mix, and that's it.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's not a big deal to bake bread. It's not a big deal to make your own cheese. It's not a big deal to make your own croissants. It's not a big deal to make your own ladyfingers in Europe. It's not a big deal to grind your own coffee at home and create it fresh. Or it's not a big deal to go out in the garden and pick a tomato. Even in the city centers, people have their garden pots on
Yes.
balconies, and they have their beehives on the roofs. Even companies promote and sell and pay for beehives on the roofs in the city center, so the bees are inside the cities too. And that's what happens in France as well. Whereas in United States and Canada, a lot of people were accustomed to having things transported and given to them on the shelves, which are now becoming more and more empty, starting from medicine to baby food to food in general, because the pre-made products are lacking. However, people that have been doing homesteading or home gardening, they're not lacking a lot. They're able to give to their families the same quality that they had before, because they weren't reliant so much on what was in a box on a shelf.
That's interesting. So we're, excuse me, we're all in North America going to be forced clearly to become more self-sufficient. And that's the whole point of feel resilient, is to be able to develop these areas in our life where we feel more resilient, in again, in our liberty and our health and our sustainability. So the ability to take more personal responsibility for the food that goes into our own bodies and to our families. So that's very interesting. So we're going to be forced in that direction. So again, just to summarize, Malva, the forces, these large forces going on to produce food crisis, both in North America and in other parts of the world, is going to be, again, this whole idea, first of all, that there's countries now who are shutting down their food exports. There's war on farmers, farmers particularly right now in the Netherlands. And of course, these people, if any of these, you see people in the Netherlands these farmers who are self-sufficient. I mean, they're a prime example of people who are resilient, who are self-sufficient, and the government's effort to try and strip some of those things away from them. And then, of course, in the actual war itself going on with Russia and Ukraine, shutting down some of the exports from those areas where ports are being closed. One of the concerns is countries, particularly in Africa, who are dependent on those grain imports. They're importing from Russia and from the Ukraine, particularly. That's going to be a big problem. And so we're going to be going through and fleshing these things out, and then looking, of course, to solutions. And it'll be interesting for us to move more towards self-sufficiency. So what foods should we be storing? What foods should we be growing? Again, in all this effort to become more self-sufficient and feel more resilient to these stresses that are coming along, particularly the coming food crisis. So Malva, I appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next video.
Lovely chatting with you all.
See you then. Bye-bye.